Hello everyone and welcome to the Yellow Submarine. Today, we will be talking about Paul McCartney and how he knew he could never top the Beatles. Before we begin, you know the drill, click on the subscribe button and turn on post notifications. One of the most significant moments in Paul McCartney's life was when his beloved boy band, the Beatles, started to fall apart. And it wasn't even the fact that he was the one blamed for the separation or the dissolution wasn't so healthy, but what puzzled Paul the most was where to go from there. What should he do next? How should he cope? Today, we'll be talking about Paul McCartney's moments before and after the Beatles, and how he became convinced that no matter what he did, he could never beat the Beatles. Let's go back to where it all began, when a young McCartney met John Lennon and his band of quarrymen playing at St. Peter's Woolton's Parish Church in Liverpool and fell in love. John, who saw Paul's guitar mastery, offered him a spot in the team he gladly accepted. Together, they would form the greatest band in the history of pop music, the Beatles. During the initial days of the band, the boys just wanted an everyday life, have a girlfriend, make some money, and do their best in the industry. According to McCartney, they were compensating for being unattractive when they were younger, so they aimed for the spotlight and just wanted to be attractive in any way possible, visually, physically, sexually. They put all their energies and efforts into making the songs, and it paid off. At every show, there would always be a lineup of fans waving at them, and the girls would scream their names. They reveled in the attention, and it made them hungry for more success. It felt like they were this unstoppable force, and nothing could come between them. But the motivation was simple. As Paul McCartney would put it, it was just a group of young boys trying to get laid, as the Americans would say. But when you're a band, you will reach a certain level of popularity where you're no more singing the songs because you want to, but because it's what the fans wanted. This was what the Beatles had to deal with later in their career. They were a group with infinite potential, and they knew they could do better, but that would mean going beyond what was expected of them. The fans had their expectations of them, the producers had their expectations of them, and they felt so restrained that they couldn't test new waters simply because nobody had ever done it, or because the public may not accept it. According to McCartney, they even tried listening to their songs to see if they were the ones overthinking it, but they didn't enjoy it one bit. It was like a million seagulls screaming, he said. So for their 8th album, the Beatles decided to try something new and dare the narrative. The result, however, was something so beautiful, it was rumored to be the best album in the history of pop music, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. What made the album so revolutionary was not just because of how good the songs were, it was in the fact that it was the first of its kind. The band had to improvise, try new forms and styles by creating a fictional band in honor of Sgt. Pepper, an officer who helped the Beatles get out of trouble in the Ontario Provincial Police. The idea was that the characters that the artists assumed in the album were fictional. Thus, they could choose to sing whatever kind of song they wanted to, and this gave them infinite opportunities to explore their tastes in music. McCartney confessed that the experience wasn't particularly scary or boring. It felt awesome for them to try new things and see how it would all play out. He said, "So when you step up to a microphone, it wasn't John Lennon Beatle doing his song. It was a guy out of this strange band, and in some way, it was liberating." While everyone was trying new things, Paul McCartney decided to experiment with an orchestral in a song titled A Day in the Life. He had been listening to a lot of avant-garde music at the time and thought this would be a great chance to test his skills. The producer, George Martin, was totally against the idea, but after a little persuasion, he gave him the benefit of the doubt. And the song, just like every other song in the album, came out to be, as Paul qualified it, very chaotic, and it's quite crazy. It's madness. The album made the band even more popular, and it gave him the first nomination in the Grammys as the Best Album of the Year, an honor no other rock music had ever gotten before them. Aside from the awards and the fact that the album topped the Billboard in the UK for over 20 weeks and in the US and several other countries, the significance of the album was in the fact that it changed people's perspective of what pop music should sound like. And because the Beatles dared to defy the status quo, other artists now had the freedom to explore different genres regardless of what music they started with. This was the liberation, the flexibility that the Beatles offered, and it was, among other things, what made them the best band of all time. But as the Beatles' career began to grow, they started facing multiple problems both within and without the band. They sometimes got weary and stressed easily, and this can be attributed to the fact that they were doing drugs, which were quite common during the time. but still very damaging. It was at this point in their life that they met Mohesh Yogi, an Indian guru popularly known as Maharishi, who was on a world tour to increase awareness on meditation and got inspired by his beliefs. They traveled to India and learned the art of meditating, which according to Paul, it was an experience they all enjoyed. It brought them the calmness they needed to succeed in their line of work, and they thought their problems were behind them, but they were so wrong. It went all down the drain when one day they were all having a meeting. Then John Lennon walked in and dropped the giant bomb. "I'm leaving the Beatles," he said. They were all shocked. They didn't know what to say to that, but deep down, they all wished sooner or later John would go back on his words and give the Beatles another chance. Paul was quite convinced that John's sudden epiphany to leave the band was due to his relationship with the famous Japanese artist Yoko Ono. Paul McCartney and John Lennon were the oldest members of the band, and they knew each other so well. Paul knew how much John loved strong women and how infatuated he was with Yoko. Even though he admitted that he wasn't entirely supportive of their relationship from the start, as having Yoko in the group was suffocating for the rest of the gang. Still, he later realized just how pure their love was and how he could never get in the middle of that. After a while, McCartney dropped his first solo album titled McCartney and held a press conference right after. In the press conference, he was asked if the Beatles would ever get back together again, and in his honest opinion, he replied, no. And that was how the rumor started that Paul McCartney ended the band. He didn't even have a chance to set the record straight. The damage was done. After the collapse of the Beatles, Paul McCartney was so confused. The Beatles was the only thing he had going. It was his identity, and he didn't know what to do without it. Unlike John Lennon, who had been planning his departure from the group for a while, Paul never saw it coming and had no plans to survive the storm. So he did the only thing he knew how to: create a band. The band was named Paul McCartney and the Wings, which was only possible with the help of his wife, Linda McCartney. Paul originally started singing alone after the band. Still, after producing 2 solo albums, he knew he couldn't do it alone anymore and employed other musicians of the time, including Denny Laine and Denny Seiwell. Together, they recorded Paul's third post-Beatles album, titled Band on the Run. This was how he started his journey to self-discovery. Paul's band survived another 10 years, releasing 7 albums that reigned internationally. It was even rumored that in the 70s, the Wings was one of the most successful bands in the world. However, the band had to be discontinued in 1981 after several unfortunate incidents following the arrest of Paul himself in Japan for the unlawful possession of cannabis and the departure of the drummer, Denny Seiwell, and the guitarist, Henry McCullough, from the band. This forced Paul to go solo again. He collaborated with many great artists, and he has remained consistent in the world of music ever since. Recently, Paul wrote 2-volume set of books titled The Lyrics, 1956 to the Present. It is a collection of all his lyrics and the stories behind them, right from the songs he wrote before the Beatles and ending with the songs from his latest album released in 2020, McCartney 3. But even with the progress he made, Paul McCartney knew deep down that he was never going to beat the Beatles, but it was okay. To him, the purpose of creating the Wings wasn't because he wanted to prove to the world that he was single-handedly better than the Beatles, but because he wanted to move forward and create a new world for himself.